Hello and welcome to the Football Word. Zach Cox, my usual co-host, is in Nashville, so I've got Kevin Duffy. I said your name weird. Kevin Duffy from MassLive.com. Kevin, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Doug. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. He's our normal guest now, I guess. He's our regular guest.
2 out of 3 weeks. So
yeah, it's a good...
Fairly regular.
Yeah, fairly regular guest. First off, Tom Brady's jersey was found. And not only one jersey, 2 jerseys were found. And as 2 people who were credentialed at the Super Bowl, I feel like if the suspect list had got long enough, we probably would have got on there. So I feel like this kind of clears our name a little bit and takes a lot of pressure off of us because we are not the ones who stole the jersey.
I was already thinking ahead of time, like, what if they come to talk to me? What am I going to say? Here's my alibi.
Yeah.
I think it's obviously a very funny story. It's kind of, it's insane that a person could get away with that twice.
Yeah.
We were in the locker room after the game, and there are a lot of things going on, but to think that you could just reach into Tom Brady's locker and steal his jersey without anyone noticing, whether it be Brady or the players around Brady at the locker. I mean, I know that this is probably the wrong takeaway, but it's kind of impressive that someone was able to do that 2 years at the Super Bowl.
And apparently he stole Von Miller's helmet and cleats too, which a helmet is... That's a bold move to try to steal a helmet after a Super Bowl because a jersey you can just kind of like tuck away somewhere. I don't know what you do with a helmet after the Super Bowl.
That's unless he was walking around with a bag. I'm very curious to see who this person is because I wonder. I mean, the hardest part of that is actually removing the item from the locker room. Right. Now he's caught in Mexico with. How do you end up getting caught? That's the crazy part today.
That is pretty unbelievable. Those Houston police weren't messing around.
I guess.
And the FBI,
the FBI involved.
It's just serious business.
There's never a shortage of bizarre storylines with the Patriots, I feel like.
I think it's kind of strange that Tom Brady only mentioned once that his other jersey was missing too. Because through all of this, everyone was making such a big deal about this jersey that at one point he said, like, oh, yeah, it happened 2 years ago, too. It's like, well, you probably should have said something more than that because then maybe they could have looked back at those tapes, too. But maybe he was, with the authorities were in on that. But
it might be part of how he didn't want to make it into a big story, so he just tried to just keep it as low-key as possible when talking about it in press conferences and have his faith in the FBI and the Houston police force. And it's crazy that we're leading off the show talking about this. But
it's fun stuff. Yes. Fun stuff. He got it, so we can make jokes about it now. It's great. Everything's solved. Getting into slightly more serious business, Malcolm Butler, who knows what's going on with this at this point. Malcolm Butler did meet with the Saints last week. There's a number of things that could be done at that meeting, talking contract parameters, possibly for a future trade, or maybe, since Malcolm Butler is a restricted free agent, signing him to an offer sheet. It seems very unlikely at this point that it's going to be an offer sheet, just because the Saints do have the 11th overall pick. That's a hugely valuable pick. So if the Patriots, we'll get into this a little bit later, talking to Nick Underhill as well, but if the Patriots accept maybe the 32nd overall pick, or maybe a package of picks, do you believe this thought that Patriots fans have thrown out there that would be the Patriots doing the Saints a favor by taking less than the 11th overall pick?
I don't think it would be doing them a favor at all because the Patriots at this point might assume that because of how things have gone with Malcolm Butler, he probably is not going to be on the team in 2018.
Exactly.
So you probably want to get the compensation for him sooner rather than later. Yeah. If he does play in the 2017 season, you have him and Stephon Gilmore, so you have probably the best 1-2 pairing in the NFL. And then if Butler walks in free agency, you won't see that comp pick until 2019. If they're able to turn it around via trade before the draft, you get the compensation in 2017. So the idea that they're doing anyone a favor, I think, is pretty false because they're really looking out for themselves, kind of similar to not exactly like the Jamie Collins situation, but a player that they realized was not going to be part of their long-term future. They were able to advance that pick 1 year. In the Butler case, if they can get a trade done by the draft, they can advance the compensation 2 years. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal. And it is, I know that Patriots fans are very touchy with this subject because they really like Malcolm Butler. He made a franchise-saving play. He's been a #1 cornerback on the defense. So any situation that you compare to this, they'll probably get a little bit oversensitive and say that's not exactly the same. But you can look to the Chandler Jones trade and the Jamie Collins trade, and it's at least somewhat similar to this. The Patriots have a little bit more leverage in this because Butler is a restricted free agent, but they shipped away Chandler Jones with 1 year left on his deal for a second-round pick and a guard that they probably weren't going to keep, and they shipped away Jamie Collins for a third-round pick. Granted, that was only half a season left for Jamie Collins, but there's a history in place at this point for the Patriots taking less compensation than anyone would expect for starting caliber star players.
Yeah, so I think that unless they feel there's a good chance that they actually can re-sign or have interest in re-signing Butler, which is a whole separate discussion because now you're talking about do they want to pour that much money into the cornerback position?
Yeah.
Denver dedicated like $19.2 million this past year to Talib and Harris. I think it goes up to about $21 million this year. So it's not like other teams don't do that, but it is kind of rare. And it seems, just reading the tea leaves here, it seems unlikely the Patriots are going to do that. They don't really let guys get to free agency and just let them walk. They're going to try to flip that for something before the comp pick would come in return. So, I mean, I think that they're probably going to make the trade. And whether it's the Saints or not remains to be seen, but the Saints are the only team that really has been connected to Malcolm Butler in terms of a visit and the interest that Sean Payton has expressed just talking publicly in interviews, which is kind of odd for a coach to be talking about a player who's not on the roster. But all indication points to Malcolm Butler going to the Saints for some package. What that is, we don't know. And
it's a really difficult situation for a number of reasons, one of which is that Malcolm Butler is under contract once he signs that tender for $3.91 million in 2017. So that salary almost has to be built into any future contract extension that he would sign because it has to be less than the $13 million that Stephon Gilmore just signed because that $3.91 million is kind of involved in it. So he's not going to get the same type of deal that a lot of other cornerbacks are, at least in New England. Maybe he will somewhere else, but it's just a very difficult situation, and I don't know. We'll see how it all pans out. But for you, what do you believe that Malcolm Butler is worth in a trade, and what do you think would be not worth trading him for? So I guess the situations that we're kind of looking at right now are number 32, I believe that would be worth trading Malcolm Butler for. But what if the Saints offered a second and third round pick? Do you take that for Butler?
Yes, I would take that for a lot of the reasons I've said. I think that they're probably at this point convinced that he's not going to be on the team in 2018. Get something for him now. Second and third is fine. Look what they did with Chandler Jones. You flip the second into 2/3 and you got two starters basically out of that trade. So you can, second and third round picks, I mean, those are cheap players. Those are guys you have under team control for 4 years. I think that they would have an interest in doing that. The 32, obviously, I think is what you're probably shooting for there. But I think both of those are viable options in a trade for Butler.
I mean, the chances are that even if the Patriots get the 32nd pick, they could trade that for a second and third round pick anyway. So, I mean, you might be looking at it either way as long as all the trade value stuff adds up. But no, it's a confusing situation, and the Ringer's Mike Lombardi didn't help it out too much yesterday by throwing out a tweet that made it seem as though he was saying that the Patriots would only accept the 11th overall pick from Malcolm Butler. Excuse me. In all reality, he was just trying to explain this situation, which is pretty complex, honestly.
It is.
I mean, it's something that's not very easy for Patriots fans to understand. Understandably, because as soon as a guy becomes a restricted free agent, it's a little confusing. But moving on a little bit, was there anything else you wanted to say about Malcolm Butler?
I guess the last thing I would say is just running through some of the scenarios. I was curious to kind of wonder about what would happen if Butler did not sign his tender by the time the draft came around, because he doesn't technically need to sign it until mid-June. So if he doesn't sign it by the time the draft comes around, the Patriots literally cannot trade him.
True.
So I know that seems like an unlikely scenario. The only reason I thought that could happen is if Butler and the Saints, something never materialized, and he feared that he was going to be traded to somewhere where he didn't know. So maybe he thinks if he's going to be traded to Cleveland or to San Francisco or somewhere like that, a bad defense, maybe being on a bad team for 1 year would decrease his value in free agency when he comes up in 2018. So he would prefer to play that season on the Patriots.
Right.
I know that sounds extremely complicated,
Yeah.
and I'm really down the Malcolm Butler rabbit hole here. But he does have a certain amount of leverage in this because he needs to sign that paper before a trade is executed.
Right. He does need to sign that paper, and even if another way to fall down this rabbit hole, and that is an interesting scenario. I think I was under the impression that he had to sign it before April 21st.
He has to sign an offer sheet from another team.
There we go. Okay. Yeah, it's just a confusing situation because even if a team signs him to an offer sheet, he has to accept the offer sheet too. So there's a number of different rabbit holes to fall down here. Mm-hmm. So the Saints couldn't offer him like a 4-year contract for $32 million because he'd just reject that, then plays on the tender. So I mean, everything has to come up pretty much perfectly with any of this to work out, and we'll just kind of have to see how it works.
And the second part of that, too, is that Butler and the Saints could reach an agreement on, like a handshake agreement on a contract they want, but that doesn't mean the Saints and the Patriots are going to reach an agreement on the stipulations of a trade. So there's different moving parts here, which I think is why when people like Nick Underhill, who covers the Saints for the New Orleans Advocate, talks about it, he says it's a pretty complex thing. There's no guarantee because there's there's Butler and the Saints and there's the Patriots and the Saints. There's two different things going on.
And technically the Patriots and the Saints can't even discuss a trade right now because Malcolm Butler is still technically a restricted free agent. So even though you heard the report back a couple of weeks ago from Adam Schefter saying that the Patriots and the Saints were talking about a trade that would involve Brandon Cooks and Malcolm Butler, that technically wasn't allowed because under the CBA, you can't discuss trade parameters for a player who's not under contract, and that's Malcolm Butler until he signs that first-round tender.
Right.
So, I mean, yeah, they could agree to a contract all they want, but if the Saints aren't going to give them what the Patriots want, the Patriots are going to be like, all right, well, whatever, we're keeping you for a year. There's nothing you can do at this point.
Yeah.
So it is very complex, and there's a lot of different moving parts, and everyone kind of has to agree all at the same time, essentially. Mm-hmm. Moving on a little bit, let's talk about Dante Hightower a little bit. The deal that he signed, it was 4 years, $42.5 million, which is significantly less than the one that Jamie Collins signed with the Browns, significantly less than the one that Chandler Jones signed with the Arizona Cardinals. And I think that this is less about the roles that those players had with the Patriots, in my view, and more about how the Cardinals and the Browns are going to use those players, especially Jamie Collins in this situation, because Chandler Jones is an edge rusher. He's going to get paid like an edge rusher. Yeah. But it seems like the Browns plan to use Jamie Collins a little bit more on the edge, whereas Dante Hightower doesn't rush the passer nearly as much. So I think that's probably why he was a little bit less valued in free agency, because he doesn't have that edge rushing potential. But what's your take on this?
I think it's some of that, but I mean, Hightower is arguably the Patriots' best pass rusher when he's utilized in such a role. Yeah. But he is an off-the-line middle linebacker. That's what his actual position is. I think also his injury history probably factored into how teams around the league value him. Whether you believe the report about the Jets pulling their offer or not, there's enough there to. I mean, Hightower had a torn ACL, MCL, and meniscus coming out of college in Alabama. I think it was in 2011 he had that. He had a sprained MCL last year, 2015, that really limited his mobility. He had what Jeff Howe reported to be a torn meniscus at the beginning of this year. That's a lot of knee.
Torn labrum too on the shoulder.
He's had shoulder injury. He had a shoulder surgery. Yeah. So that, to me, that's a lot. The knee stuff kind of might worry teams. That's a lot of, even though it's only one really massive knee injury with the ACL in college, it's a lot of repeated situations each year. So teams might question how long he can play. Do you want to give $27 million guaranteed to a guy who's only going to play for 3 more years? Right. That's the question. Maybe the market wasn't as good as he thought it was going to be, and he accepted a pretty fair. I mean, his contract it's not like he barely got paid.
Contract.
He got a pretty big contract.
Absolutely.
He got $19 million guaranteed, which, as you said, is just a step below what Jamie Collins and a few steps below what Chandler Jones got, but different positions.
Yeah, and I mean, I still thought it was a good deal for the Patriots. No one knows Dante Hightower's medical history better than the Patriots do. Mm-hmm. They know that he's a gamer, and he's missed a lot of games. He's never missed a playoff game for the Patriots, which I think is pretty significant because these aren't season-ending injuries. They're just these little, I mean, they're a lot more than nicks and bruises. I'm not going to say that they're nicks and bruises because they're significant injuries, but they're ones that he's willing to play through to a certain extent, and they're ones that the Patriots are willing to play him through when the games are really on the line and really matter. So I thought it was really important for the Patriots to bring him back, and the deal, I think, I think he got paid. I mean, he got paid a fair amount for the position that he plays and the role that he plays, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about Darrelle Revis for a little bit.
Okay.
Darrelle Revis was obviously on the Patriots in 2014, went back to the Jets in a high-profile move, and was garbage last year. He was a heap of trash trying to cover the NFL wide receivers. Yep. So he got cut, and a couple of the Boston writers wrote about the possibility of Darrelle Revis rejoining the Patriots in 2017. And I guess where this is all coming from is that if he plays on a team in 2017, as long as he makes less than $6 million, the Jets still have to pay him. Mm-hmm. So he could sign a veteran minimum contract that would pay him, what is it, like $1 million, $2 million, something like that. Mm-hmm. And the Jets would still have to pay the difference up to $6 million. So it would just be kind of fun, I guess, for the Patriots to have the Jets play a player's salary while he's playing for their team. But I just can't really see this coming together because he was so bad last year. And even if Malcolm Butler's traded, then you still have Stephon Gilmore and Eric Rowe on the edge. So then you're talking about Revis as a potential slot cornerback. People have mentioned safety, but the guy doesn't really care that much about hitting people, so I don't know how good of a safety he'd be. Mm-hmm. What's your take on Revis to the Patriots?
I don't really see it at all. I think we should start with Eric Rowe.
Right.
He's a competent number 2 corner.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's kind of being lost in the discussion when we're talking about if Butler moves on, what are they going to do? They have a guy in Gilmore who clearly they like.
Yeah.
The whole Butler-Gilmore thing might come down to that Belichick might just think Gilmore's a better player than Butler. Yep. And then you have Rowe, who gave you pretty good production against some of the bigger receivers last year. He did a good job on A.J. Green in really his first action as a member of the Patriots. Yeah. And he's a third-year guy. He's young, he's long, there's a lot to like about him. So they're fine at cornerback. They don't need to sign someone like Darrelle Revis. And Revis is, I mean, let's face it, he's old.
Yeah.
This is a young players league. Belichick doesn't like to recycle old players. You want to get young guys who are on the uptick of their careers. You don't want to get guys who just have a big name. And it's fun for fans to talk about, but in terms of football sense, I don't think it makes much sense at all.
No, and sometimes with the Patriots, if a guy's been here before, then sometimes it's easy to tie him back to the Patriots. And it's happened before with guys like Deion Branch who have come back. Sometimes Belichick just says to these players, that ship has sailed. That's it for us with you, and carry on your merry way. And that's how I feel this is probably going to wind up with Darrelle Revis, just because, I don't know, I don't totally get it. Obviously, he said that he's lost weight. Sounds like he might be a little bit more motivated this year, but at the same time, what's really in it for him to try to prove it one more year? He had his career. Yeah. He was the best cornerback in the NFL for, 5 or 6 years. He won a Super Bowl. Now he's going to be playing for free, basically, because he'll get paid regardless next year. So if he decides to play football, it's for free. If anything, it makes more sense for him to try to come back in 2018 or something, but I don't know. I can't see it happening.
Yeah, it's one that fans are going to want to talk about, but I agree with you. It just doesn't make much sense.
No. So that will do it for our friend Kevin Duffy here on the Football Word. And now we will speak to Nick Underhill, who used to write for MassLive.com.
Doubling up on Mass Live today.
Doubling up on Mass Live. We're not getting Jen McCaffrey or Nick O'Malley or Kevin Dillon in here. Just got to stick with you guys. But Nick now writes for the New Orleans Advocate, which is pertinent, I guess, because of the Malcolm Butler, Brandon Cooks. Plenty to talk to Nick about, so let's talk to Nick now. Nick, thank you very much for joining us here on the Football Word. You used to cover the Patriots for MassLive.com, so how is it conversing with Patriots fans again, now about the Saints, now about this potential Malcolm Butler trade?
Oh, it's been delightful, Doug. I'm just glad to have them back in my life. I mean, I don't want to do them any favors by responding to their questions, but, I do them a solid, which I guess Bill Belichick does sometimes, a la the Wes Welker trade, but you don't want to do too many favors in this business.
No, that's a favorite term of Patriots fans right now, that if somehow the Patriots trade Malcolm Butler to the Saints for the 32nd overall pick, that would be the Patriots doing a favor for the Saints because it would not force them to give up that number 11 pick. I think that I've made it pretty clear on my side why I don't believe that would be the Patriots doing the Saints a favor. What is your opinion on this matter?
Well, to me, if they don't sign Butler to an offer sheet and nobody signs Butler to an offer sheet, then that tender level really doesn't mean anything. But on April 21st, if there's no other offers, and the only offer is, say, the Saints offering 32 or a second and a third, at that point, that becomes his market value, in that 11th pick no longer matters. Like, you could take the Nikes off your feet and put them on eBay and list them for $780, but if you put a best offer option on there and the best offer's $50, then the market value then is $50. The 780 you set doesn't matter. So at that point, then you decide, do you want to take the offer or do you want to keep the shoes? And that might be what ends up happening here in this situation. But if you take 32 and there aren't other offers 1 to 31, that's not doing anyone a favor. That's deciding, hey, I'm going to take the best offer that's out there for a player that's going to walk in a year.
That is a perfect metaphor. I'm glad that you agree with me, because now it's coming from someone else's mouth, not just mine. I completely agree with you, and it sounds like you have some experience selling Nikes and potentially getting a best offer in that situation. I will move on. Second question here. What do you believe is the most likely scenario that actually comes out of this? Do you think that Butler actually does wind up going to the Saints? Do the Saints like him enough to actually give up a significant amount to take him on for what's really only kind of 1 year, because then they have to give him that contract extension?
The feeling I've gathered is that the Saints want him here. I think Butler wants to be here if the money's right, and he can't get paid by the Patriots. I think he wants to get paid, and I think he would want to come here. I think the Saints would be willing to give him the money that the Patriots probably aren't. If it came out that there was a deal on the table for 13 or 14 million a year over 4 years, and say 20 or 25 million guaranteed, I wouldn't be surprised by that one little bit. And I think the Saints are motivated to make a trade. I mean, one of the things that is kind of important here is that I think this team's kind of at a critical point where, Drew Brees isn't under contract after this year. He said he's not interested in signing right now. He wants to wait and see where things are at the end of the year. And they've had 3 7-9 seasons. If they want to keep this thing together, I think they kind of got to get better right now. And I think giving up a draft pick for a proven player, especially at cornerback, where sometimes the transition period from college to the pros can be a little bit longer, I think there's plenty of motivation for the Saints to get something done, but there's a lot of moving parts here. I mean, the contract could fall apart. Belichick is a wild card all the time, and I know there's some fear that even if they work things out with Butler, maybe Bill wouldn't be willing to trade him. So, the last time I checked yesterday, I was told, it's kind of like a 50-50 deal still that could go either way. But I think, if it were just up to the Saints, it'd probably already be a done deal.
Yeah, one thing that I think is kind of interesting is that Sean Payton basically is already talking like Malcolm Butler is on the team. He spoke on the radio about the visit, about, how well it went, and I'm not sure the exact verbiage they used, but does that almost put more pressure on him and more pressure on the Saints to get this deal done? Because now I'm assuming that New Orleans fans are pretty fired up at the prospect of having Butler on their defense.
Oh, they're definitely fired up. The thing with Peyton, though, is that it's very hard to corner him, but if you corner him, oftentimes he's very expansive and open. So, and he's out promoting his water and everything. He's doing these radio spots. He's kind of in a position where, he's backed into a corner. If somebody asks him a question, he's going to answer. But I don't think he said a whole lot. He said he liked the player. The one thing that was kind of weird to me is that he announced the visit to the Associated Press, which is kind of out of character for him. So, but I think maybe he wants people to know that they're trying to do everything they can to try to improve this team. And Sean's a guy that gets very excited about things. He's impatient. So I think with him coming, I just think he was probably fired up about the prospect, and he just maybe let the cat out of the bag a little bit.
Full disclosure here, me and you have talked about this via text, via Twitter, multiple times already, but last week I wrote that Patriots fans should not get their hopes up at the prospect of getting that number 11 pick. A couple of reports have come out since then have made me a little bit worried that maybe my column will show up on Old Takes Exposed. Just try to convince me that the Saints won't give up that number 11 pick.
Everything I've heard is that it's not going to be 11. Things change. Maybe they get desperate and they give it up. At this point, I would be extremely surprised if that happens. That'd almost be like trading, say, like Brandon Cooks and Reuben Foster for Malcolm Butler, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Saints have a ton of holes on defense. Even if they get Butler, they don't really have anyone at that pass rusher spot opposite Cam Jordan. That was manned by Paul Kruger last year, which wasn't good. They signed Alex Okafor. He's kind of a flyer. It's been 2 years since he's really done anything. He had, I think, 8.5 sacks in 2014, and really nothing the last 2 years that came close to that. So if they give up 11, that's a ton to pay, and I'd really be shocked. And I'm kind of curious what you've seen that would make you think that. I know Michael Lombardi had the thing, but then he told you that he was just explaining the RFA rules. I think it would take that would be a lot of desperation to give up the 11th pick to get him.
No, there's nothing concrete out there. The Lombardi thing yesterday did scare me a little bit because I wasn't totally sure what his tweets meant. Basically, what he said was that the Saints would have to give up the 11th pick for Malcolm Butler, but he was really using that as a technicality because Butler has not signed his tender yet. So the only way to get Malcolm Butler on the Saints at this point is for them to sign him to that offer sheet. I did want to talk about Brandon Cooks a little bit because I feel like the fact that the Patriots already made a trade with the Saints, the fact that they already brought in Brandon Cooks, almost complicates matters a little bit more for this trade because the Saints already have a value in place for Brandon Cooks. The Saints received the 32nd overall pick for Brandon Cooks. So if they value Brandon Cooks as a player more than Malcolm Butler, or if it's about the same, then they're not going to be willing to give that number 11 pick, and they probably would be willing to give up that 32nd pick, or like you said, the second and third. In this scenario, Malcolm Butler, restricted free agent, he only has that tender left on his deal. Brandon Cooks was under contract for 2 more team-friendly years. Which player in this situation do you think actually has more value on the trade market, Brandon Cooks or Malcolm Butler?
I think if you just look through like a wide prism of all 32 teams, it's probably Cooks just because he's younger and he's got more time left, and he could be with your team for a lot longer. I think if you look at it from the Saints' point of view, their offense is always fine, and I don't think it's going to be any different this time. Darren Sproles goes, Reggie Bush goes, Jimmy Graham goes. Anybody can go. They keep moving the ball. They signed Ted Ginn. He's not Brandon Cooks, but he can do what they need from that spot, which is really kind of just to run clear out routes, move a safety back, open things up for the guys underneath, and be fine. And their defense has been a mess. So I think for this team, Malcolm Butler has more value to the Saints than he probably would maybe anywhere else in the league. And Brandon Cooks, I think he's more valuable to other teams than he is for the Saints. So from that point of view, I definitely think Butler's more valuable here. But I think they did maybe kind of give up some leverage by making that first trade. They didn't want to pay the $780,000 roster bonus he was due, which I get. But if they would have held out, maybe they could be able to tempt the Patriots a little bit easier to maybe meet them where they view the value. Whereas now they're kind of at Bill Belichick's mercy a little bit.
Yeah, I do feel like that trade gave the Patriots a little bit of leverage here. And it's really pretty even, I think, as far as value goes between Cooks and Butler. I might say that Cooks has a little bit more value just because he is younger. He's under control for a little bit longer. But Butler certainly ranks higher among NFL cornerbacks than Brandon Cooks does among NFL wide receivers. So, pretty similar players. Brandon Cooks beat Malcolm Butler significantly in a couple practices there, but I'm not sure how much that really has to do with the value there. One final question just about Brandon Cooks, because Patriots fans don't know a ton about this guy. I think that the assumption here is that Cooks is the kind of player who can kind of line up anywhere in an offense, be that outside role guy who can run down the field and run a 9 route for a deep catch. Can also maybe line up in the slot because he's got that quickness. Do you see that out of him, or do you see his game being a little bit more one-dimensional than that?
I think he's great deep. There's few players that I think are better than him running deep routes and making those catches. The thing about him, kind of the way the Patriots use their slot guys, it's kind of more over the middle, or at least that's how it was when I was covering the Patriots. And the area where Cooks kind of struggles a little bit is that despite his speed, you look at his college tape and he's like wildly elusive. In the NFL, that didn't show up. He only broke 4 tackles last year. If he isn't catching the ball over the middle in space, it's gonna be catch and tackle, catch and tackle, catch and tackle. You very rarely see him make anyone miss. You'd think he'd be much better on screen passes. Maybe some of that's due to the blocking, but still, he's not beating a guy when it's one-on-one, him and a defender. He just doesn't make those plays. And I think part of his frustration here is that he wanted to do more of that stuff over the middle in that, but Michael Thomas is better in intermediate. Willie Snead is a guy that makes people miss and can, bully people over, throw a stiff arm. Cooks doesn't do any of that. But, I mean, if he gets the ball in space and can turn the corner, he's going to be gone. But, I mean, it's kind of like, 15, 20 catches where it's catch and tackle to get that one where he kind of blows up.
That is very interesting, and we will see how he does fit into the Patriots offense, because sometimes guys have a way of doing something a little bit different, but if he doesn't have that ability to make guys miss, then maybe he won't be used too heavily in the slot. Regardless, thank you very much for joining us here, Nick. It's always fun talking football with you, and hopefully I get to see you in person sometime soon. You didn't come to the Super Bowl. That was a little bit suspicious. I thought you might have been the guy who took Tom Brady's jersey, but it seems like you're in the clear on that one at this point. But thank you again for joining us here on the Football Word.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And if you ever lose a shirt, definitely call the Houston PD. They'll find it.
Thank you for watching this episode of The Football Word. We will be back on Thursday with another Between the Tackles podcast. We'll be back next Monday with another Football Word. So tune in there on Nesson.com.